Our speaker tonight is Julie O'Donnell, and she will talk about native pollinators in our gardens. Julie is a Community Wildlife Habitat Steward and retired master gardener with over 35 years of experience in creating wildlife-friendly gardens. She has focused on the use of native plants in the home landscape and the benefits that specific plants offer to wildlife. Her personal certified wildlife habitat contains over 200 species of native plants in addition to food plants and ornamentals. Her garden habitat has attracted birds, butterflies, pollinators, and beneficial insects for 30 years. In 2012, the rare western bumblebee was found in her garden. She is also active in educational community outreach, and she volunteers for the Washington Native Plant Society, the Washington Butterfly Association, Kruckeberg Botanic Garden, the Adopt a Stream Foundation, and the National Wildlife Federation. Her garden has been featured in Pacific Horticulture, Birdwatching Magazine, the Butterfly Gardener, and Sunset Publications. So thank you so much for being with us tonight, Julie.
Thank you, Paulette. And I like to let people know the rest of my story is that I retired after 23 years as a tutor in public schools in special education. And so now this is my classroom. So that's how I look at it. Sometimes I'll give you the tiniest bit of homework. I have a video for you to watch at home, but that's later in the program. So anyway, thank you for having me speak tonight. I'd like to give a land acknowledgement that I live and garden on the lands of the Coast Salish people. They are the original and continuing stewards of the coastlines and forests of the Salish Sea. I like to recognize that the relationship between the Coast Salish and native plants that offer sustenance and a connection to cultural traditions. The importance of native plants goes back in time, and they are part of our natural history and heritage in our region. I also think I should acknowledge that we have a pretty savvy audience tonight. And so I know some of you are quite familiar with the insects and butterflies and plants that we'll talk about. So I hope you will find a new native plant or other plant to add to your own landscape as a result of coming tonight. So we will be looking at some of the many native pollinators that may be found in the Puget Sound region, in parks, gardens, natural areas, and many of these insects are found in other parts of the state. So it's not just exclusive to here. That's just my epicenter. So that's where these photos are from, and that's where these insects are living. And the last few slides at the end of the program will show a conversion of lawn to habitat. And it's a kind of an energizing section of the program because you get to see the results in a couple of years of a transformation from a very bare landscape to a very productive and habitat-friendly landscape. And so that's really, I'm more knowledgeable probably about the plants and how to grow them than I am about all the insects, but I have some familiarity with the insects, so please be patient with me. If I can't answer all your questions, I'll do my best.
We got a lot of experts here tonight too, so they may
I
be able to
know
help
we
out as
do. We may
well.
have to lean on some of them. We
Yeah.
sure do. So a pollinator can be any insect, bird, or animal that transfers pollen from one flower to another flower of the same species. Successful pollination results in the formation of fruit and seeds. Hummingbirds, butterflies, and moths, bees, beetles, flies, and wasps may all contribute to pollination. And in Washington state, our bats eat insects. They're insectivores. So bats that pollinate are more likely to be found in Mexico, the Southwest, and tropical areas, not so much where we live. So here's a garden photo of a mourning cloak visiting Pacific ninebark. And Pacific ninebark is a garden-friendly native plant. And as Stuart, I can see you, so I got to wave. But as Stuart likes to say, our native plants are co-adapted, codependent, and co-evolved with our local insects, Lepidoptera caterpillars in particular, I will add. And native plants are also best adapted to the local soils and the weather conditions. And I can attest to that after all these years of growing so many different plants, both our natives, our local natives, and plants from other places. The natives are very resilient. They adapt to the wet winters, and they thrive, and they just do really well beyond expectation. I don't know how many times I've walked around our garden and said to my husband, that's not supposed to get that big. And if you garden in the Pacific Northwest, you may have had that experience too. So I will also add that the genus Physocarpus is found across North America. And the East Coast species is often for sale locally because it has an ornamental purple-leaved form. And if you are looking for specifically the native plants that are going to be so adapted and resilient to differing changes in our climate and whatever is going on out there in the world, look for the species name Capitatus. If you live east of the Cascades, you might look for Physocarpus malvaceus or mallow ninebark. These are honeybees, Apis mellifera, and they are not native to North America. They are a domesticated insect that has been brought to North America from Europe and elsewhere, and so they are not the topic of this program. Instead, we'll focus on the bees and pollinators native to our region. Insect pollination is required and preferred for many, many food crops and 85% or more of the world's flowering plants. In the wake of colony collapse disorder that has affected honeybees since around 2006, interest in native pollinators has increased, and it's been discovered that many of our native bees do an excellent job pollinating crops, provided they have adjacent natural areas where they can nest and overwinter. They simply need places to live. Margins around agriculture and even in and around our gardens make a big difference. And so estimates in the value of pollination by native bees in North America amount to billions of dollars annually. So we will follow the story of creating garden habitat in our family garden. And that's more or less how it looks today, but the inset photo shows you what things looked like back in 1987 when we moved here. And so the plants, there weren't very many plants, and pollinators and birds were scarce. It was just like a vacant lot. And so I got to work right away planting for birds initially, but then everything else came into it over time. And these books help guide the plantings that brought this half acre to life. And so in the far back there, so you can see there are some blueberries. At the time, were some grapevines. There's a small orchard. There is a little meadow with wildflowers that leads into a woodland with native plants. And I'll see if I can move my cursor and make a circle. This is Pacific ninebark. You can see it's really large. It's a huge shrub. We actually fit a few chairs under it in the summer sun. It's like a shade umbrella. It's quite wonderful and attractive. This is also a certified wildlife habitat, and that means I filled out a checklist of pollinator and bird-friendly activities that are used in this garden that make it a place where other creatures can live. And I really enjoy being part of that network because it connects us to other pollinator gardens across North America. And there's a small fee, a one-time fee. And as a thank you, you receive a magazine, National Wildlife, for 1 year. But it also makes a voice for backyard gardens and local wildlife and shows that people are interested and care enough to cast their vote by signing up with these programs. And it supports education and school programs that get kids outdoors. So I think that's valuable. We're going to take a closer look at that far back where the pink flowers of Pacific rhododendron grow with red huckleberry, vine maple, mock orange, and more to provide a succession of nectar and pollen. And this is where thimbleberry and salmonberry grow with enough room to spread, and it's where logs and brush piles offer potential nest sites. So the variety of native plants increases the abundance and diversity of pollinators and butterflies that are able to live along the edge of the garden. Now, in the 1990s, some of you know I took Heidi Ulsch's butterfly gardening class. I took it twice, 2 different sessions, a few years apart, and I began to plant flowers that would attract butterflies, both native and ornamental. And so this burst of color is wonderful and it's a pleasure. And I just think mixing in your goldenrod with your phlox has worked really well for me. And the number of pollinators that come at times is really astounding. It's like they were all waiting in those woodland edges in nature just for the right plants to bring them out into the sunshine.
Really, can you point out the goldenrod and also tell us what's native and what's
Sure. So the yellow flowers are goldenrod. These tall ones are goldenrod. I can't use my cursor. It's too sensitive. Um, and then the phlox is the light pink in the middle. And then there are some, it's a blue sage, and there's a purple, I'm not sure if I remember what that one is. I don't think it's there anymore. Things come and go in a garden. It's a very fluid kind of a plant. Some plants live over time, some get more vigorous, some die out. And we have little globes of blue Echinops retro. And they're not blue right now, they're kind of gray, but those little balls, but they attract bumblebees like anything when they open up in flowers. And
Julie,
so,
are those
what's that?
are those gay feathers in the lower right? Is that gay
Oh,
feather?
I might have had Liatris. Yeah, that could be Liatris. It could be. And I think though it's a kind of salvia. But I grow both and I have grown over time. And so it's such a long-term garden that things have changed. And I do have plant lists. That's how I know I have so many species of natives because somewhere 5 or 10 years in, I started to forget and needed to write down what was growing over here. And so, okay, so this is the floral part of the planting for butterflies. And as you know, a butterfly is only one stage of an entire life cycle, and so in order to attract them, their host plants must be nearby. And with that in mind, I'll share a sampling of host plants for butterfly caterpillars coming up. And thank you, David Nunnally, if you're out there, for this slide. This is the larva of an echo azure, and it's feeding on red twig dogwood or red osier dogwood. It's the same exact plant, different common names. And these caterpillars are tiny, so you're not really going to see them or notice them very likely. And I think most of the people know that caterpillars and larvae are interchangeable. Larvae is the scientific name, and larva just means one. So I know people get a little mixed up on that distinction sometimes. But many of the Lepidoptera have native plants they are specific to. The echo azure is a little more of a generalist. It'll feed on a number of different native plants, perhaps other things too. But often there are preferences between the butterfly, caterpillars, and the plants that they are most successful being reared on. And so I should share, I just put the title on here. I didn't have a photo of Life Histories of Cascadia Butterflies by David James and Dave Nunnally. Has beautiful photos of all these caterpillars and eggs, and it's a great place to learn, as well as Bob Pyle's books too have sections on what are the host plants, what are the caterpillars feeding on. And so you can spend years reading all that fine print. And I do it now and then on specific butterflies that we have in the region. And that's where this information comes from. So more host plants for the echo azure include ocean spray, red elderberry, and Douglas spirea. And the Douglas spirea will spread to cover acres of wetlands, although if you plant it in a garden with average soil, it's more inclined to stay put. Some of these shrubs get quite large, so know that ahead of time. Now, stinging nettles are really a favorite of, I'm going to say it, of butterfly enthusiasts because they are so attractive as a host plant to many of the butterflies, especially from the top, the red admiral, satyr anglewing, and Milbert's tortoiseshell. And so if I'm in the city visiting someone and I see a red admiral, I think, hooray, someone's got nettles around here. Usually it's a park or a natural area because they are a devilish thing to grow in a garden. And I say that obviously they sting, but they don't stay put either. They just spread rampantly in my garden. And pretty soon they're in the path of the lawnmower. And I always feel bad, but they did that to themselves. They just spread everywhere. So if that's a problem for you, don't try to grow them. But do recognize how beneficial they are and see if we can get our cities to maintain nettles in some natural areas. So small gardens also make a difference, whether it's a hummingbird, a butterfly, a spider making a web, or a ladybug. Our small habitats can be very helpful, especially to pollinators. And the Xerces Society folks that do the training like to remind their people in the class that even a patio with flowering plants is habitat for a pollinator. And so I would like to retell David James' story. This will be a short version. We have Melanie's wonderful photo of a monarch with a tag on it. And this is the story of a monarch that was raised by a young girl named Amelia who lives near Corvallis. Amelia helped tag the monarch before releasing it on August 30th, 2016. And 19 days later, this monarch was spotted in San Francisco in a garden on the 4th story of an apartment building. It had flown 425 air miles. Did I get that right? Something like that. It averaged, I believe, 25 miles a day, but it had flown over 400 miles to get here. And the way David James tells the story is fantastic because it leapfrogs. This monarch shows up another 2 or 3 times. And I won't attempt that version. But David, if you're here and you want to speak up and tell the rest of that story, I would invite you to do so. And in the meantime, I just want to encourage people in apartments and in cities, please, by all means, garden. Anyway, even if it's just in a planter on a patio. It's very rewarding. And so the silvery blue is selective in seeking lupin and legumes for its larvae. And lupins are also very appealing to bumblebees. And so these plants are typically found in nature where the silvery blue is more common. I used to have silvery blues years ago, back in the 90s, but they faded out. And I still have the Echo Azure. I'm glad for that, but no more silvery blues in my neighborhood. And so the butterflies, here I've planted all these wonderful flowers for butterflies, but the butterflies are waiting for warm, sunny days. And so are we, just like right now. And in the meantime, the flowers were coming up, and June, May, and June can be kind of cool and wet. Well, the garden filled with lots of pollinators. And for example, this bumblebee. And so in 2012, I had an opportunity to be part of a citizen science project to observe and record the pollinators in our garden. And Megan joined me in this prospect. And so I'd like to share with you some of what I've learned. And we'll start with, forgive the review, the folks that already know this, how to recognize these insects. Are they bees or wasps or flies? What are they? Okay, so bees and wasps share a lot of characteristics. They both have long antennae. They have eyes along the sides of the head, and they have 4 wings. So our little creature on the left, who I find just darling, and I think we decided it was an andrina or a mining bee. We know that's a bee because it has these legs covered in scopae or branched hairs that are particularly effective at transporting pollen. And so bees are their branched hairs or scopae are what make them so effective as pollinators. And so bees are using that pollen, they're taking it back to their nest to feed their caterpillars or larvae as a source of protein. Now, wasps, on the other hand, are feeding other insects as a source of protein to their brood cells or their larvae. And so wasps don't have the collection of scopae. They have a smooth shine. They have that pointed abdomen that you see and a narrow waist, but they also have 4 wings and long antennae. So those are some key characteristics. And below we have something that could be a bee. It has some fuzziness to it, like it has hairs. But if we look at the head, the eyes are very different. They're across the top of the head and small antennae, and it only has 2 wings. So this is a fly. And again, it's difficult to tell the number of wings on a living insect. So when some insists, and I've been with hiking groups and people will insist, well, that has to be a wasp because it has yellow and black stripes, or it has to be a bee because it's fuzzy. Well, now there's some actual features you can look for so you can tell which insect you are looking at. We'll start with bumblebees, and they are one of the most widespread native pollinators, and they're adapted to cold regions. So they're way up north in the Yukon and Alaska and up in our mountains too at high elevations. And they create colonies with a queen and many worker bees. So they are considered a social bee or social insect. Sometimes the term eusocial is used, EU social. And but they don't have a hive, they have a colony, so a little different than a honeybee. And they do have the queen, they do have workers, so they have differentiated social structure within their colony. And their identification is tricky because different species share similar color patterns. And this book, along with these websites, go into this in detail. Very helpful. I wish we had had WashingtonBumblebees.org when I was trying to sort out my bumblebees back in 2012. But anyway, it's such a help. So you get to benefit from all of these organizations and learn more of your identification. And the season is coming. So photos are a great way to go because you can get the photo, you can look at at the creature you photographed, and then you can enlarge it on your computer screen and get a better look and use your book and your ways you're going to try to identify it. Whereas I just find it very helpful to take photos. So genus, of course, is Bombus for our bumblebees. And the most common bumblebee in Western Washington is Vosnesenskii. And this one has a very, I think it's a queen. It's really large, and it has a large bump on its leg called a corbiculum, which is its pollen basket. So people say, well, is there something wrong with it? No, that just tells you this is a female bee, a queen or a worker. She's collecting the pollen to take back to the nest to feed to the brood cells. And the life cycle of a bumblebee pretty much starts with queens emerging in late winter. So let's start, I won't point to it, but let's call it 1 o'clock on your computer screen. Late winter, early spring. Right now, lots of bumblebees at my house. I imagine you're also starting to see them, but no butterflies yet. Although on some warm days, I probably will see some. So the queens emerge right now, or a month ago, and they start looking for flowers, for pollen and nectar. They need the nectar for themselves to get energy. They need the pollen for the protein mixed with nectar as food for their young. So once the queen finds plenty of floral resources, she'll look for a nest site, and that definitely is happening right now. Nest sites can be old rodent tunnels. It can be, I'll show you some more slides in a few minutes, but lots of little cavities underground or a crevice in an old shed or a snag. And once she finds a nest site, she will lay eggs, and these become the first worker bees. So when those workers emerge and go out to forage, the queen stays in the nest and just lays eggs. By late summer, the workers start to die out. Even sooner, midsummer, mid-July onward, the worker bees start to die out. And somewhere after mid-July, new queens and males emerge. They mate, and by the end of summer, everybody dies except for the overwintering newly mated queen, and she will continue to forage right up until frost. So a queen bumblebee lives about 1 year. And here's an example. This is a September photo of autumn helenium. You can see the difference in size between a queen and a male. And autumn helenium is a great native plant. It's also found as a hybrid at many plant retailers. I have tried to grow the hybrid. It has died out, but my native autumn helenium, which I got from Krukeberg Botanic Garden, MSK Nursery, has done famously, and it spreads and it grows and it attracts native pollinators and honeybees in late August and September. And so for pollinators, we try to find close to species plants as possible and avoid some of the cultivars or hybridized, or especially the double flowers, because in the process of creating those special characteristics, sometimes the pollen and the nectar is not as great or is more difficult for the bees to access. And so we want to make as natural as possible and try to go as native as possible. So bumblebees have a special relationship with berries, both cultivated and native. And so at the bottom, evergreen huckleberry has flowers that are visited by hummingbirds and bumblebees. And as a result of pollination, there are berries for people, birds, and wildlife. So one of the concerns about if there's a decrease in pollinators or there's a mismatch between pollinators and flowering times, that if plants aren't properly pollinated, there may be fewer berries. And that can affect wildlife as well as people. And so thank you, David Jennings, for that photo of he's got a bumblebee and coming on his raspberries. And the other two are in our garden, the other two photos. So after observing these bees all summer and getting better at RID, we knew some species were in decline. And one day, Megan was out looking at our common milkweed. It's not the native species. That was a problem of it being mislabeled. I thought I was buying Washington's showy milkweed, and instead I came home with the Midwestern Asclepias syriaca. You couldn't tell in its leafy form until it flowered. In the meantime, it spread to about 40 stalks out in my back garden. It just looks like a wild place. The bees think that is pretty wonderful. So anyway, Megan sent this photo. You can see the white butt on the bee there. She said, well, that's something we haven't seen this summer. So she sent that to the Xerces Society. They sent it on to Stanford, and Stanford confirmed this is a Western bumblebee. And at the time, 2012, 2013, when we saw it, in serious decline. So there were some remnant populations left. So we were pretty excited about that. We haven't seen it since 2013. And I will tell you what happened in 2014 is, well, before this happened, we would watch which way did they leave? Where did they go when they left our garden? And so we were both creating lines of sight to where we thought they might have a nest. And in 2014, a large farm, maybe 15 acres, was cleared and turned into housing. And so we no longer see this bumblebee. I don't have proof of that, but a strong suspicion, because in the meantime, on the other side of that farm, there were other sightings of this bumblebee in a blackberry patch. So that's the rest of the story for the local sightings of the Western bumblebee. But look at all these other bees on this milkweed. So below the bumblebee is a honeybee. And then around 11 o'clock on the top part of the flower, there are all these tiny little native pollinating bees. So it's just a magnet, and it's fragrant too. Now, this photo was taken in Oregon by conservation biologist Rich Hatfield. And to understand what happened to this bee, which was at one time the most common bee in the Western United States, it helps to know that bumblebees can vibrate their wing muscles up to 300 times per second. And this allows them to warm themselves and fly in cool weather. And it also allows them to buzz pollinate New World crops. And it makes them especially effective at pollinating cucumbers, squash family, pumpkins, blueberries, tomatoes, peppers, and so on. And so the Western bumblebee was in demand for use in commercial greenhouses. And sometime in the 90s, Western bumblebee queens were sent to Europe to breeding facilities. When they were shipped back to the United States, it's believed they carried a European pathogen that's thought to be the cause of their decline. And so the problem also has affected the Franklin's bumblebee, which is closely related. And that bumblebee is found in Oregon and California, but now may be extinct. And so this is the homework part, but this is a really fun 5-minute. You'll enjoy it with your cup of tea or wine or whatever. Do a search for the old man and the bee and put CNN at the end of your search, because if you don't, you'll get the old man and the bee and you'll get a cartoon. And if you look at CNN, you'll never find it. So if you put in a search the way this is written, you will bring up a 5-minute video of Robin Thorpe out in the field searching for the Franklin's bumblebee. And it adds a lot of detail to this story that I'm telling. And so I hope you'll do that. I think you'll enjoy it. I've watched it a number of times. Okay, so Back in the garden, this is fairy bells, and it's a lovely, delicate flower for the woodland edge. And here we have another bumblebee, Bombus fervidus variety californicus, I think is what it's being called. So anyway, it's very much like Bombus fos, but it has a black face. And these flowers are one of its favorites. So before we do more about plants, let's look at some of the lesser known pollinators. Bees that build an individual nest without a queen or workers are known as solitary. Mason bees, mining bees, sweat bees, and leafcutters are common examples. The mason bee is active April, May, June at the right time to pollinate fruit trees. And she is a solitary bee. The female does all the work to build the nest and forage for nectar and pollen. And so she doesn't have worker bees to defend her nest. She doesn't have probably the energy or the time. It's not her concern. Her concern is food and building a nest. And so they are unlikely to sting. I'm told they really have a weak sting, even if you handled one. And so mason bees only forage within 300 feet of the nest, and they require a source of mud for sealing their brood chambers. As few as 250 mason bees can pollinate 1 acre of apple trees, whereas 15,000 or more honeybees are needed for the same pollination. Some reasons for the effectiveness of Osmia lignaria include the larger body, so they are able to contact and dislodge more pollen, and they are tolerant of flying in cool and damp weather. So about 70% of native bees nest underground. And these nests belong to mining bees. They are a mostly solitary bee, but here the nests are grouped together because of the suitable sandy soil. So they prefer this kind of sandiness if it's slightly compact. They prefer it to not be irrigated, so that's helpful. So even if you don't intend to plant something, reducing lawn can improve the chance that ground nesting pollinators will have access to nest sites. And here's a little head of a bee with its antenna sticking out. And the green metallic sweat bees have similar nest site requirements. Both photos are local. And so these bees are they're around our gardens and schools, and they are around. So anything you can do to make it easier for them to have undisturbed nest sites, places that are free of pets, free of sprinklers, could help them out potentially. These sweat bees have made their nest sites in a rock garden in North Seattle. Same thing. It's sandy, gravelly soil, well drained, no additional sprinklers or water. Okay, on the right, you can quiz yourself. We have a fuzzy looking insect. Is it a bumblebee? So look on the left, there are the eyes, there are the antennae. And you know those small antennae and the large eyes across the top of the head tell us this is a fly. It is a Narcissus bulb fly. It only has 2 wings, and they can be common. If you grow bulbs, you might have this bee-like fly, and it is a bumblebee mimic. Wasps also transfer pollen as they visit flowers. This is a bee wolf, and it hunts bees, and that's what it takes back to its nest. But here it's foraging for nectar and pollen for its own food. And the potter wasp is beneficial. It feeds on the caterpillars of spruce budworm and alfalfa weevil. It builds a solitary mud nest, And just like solitary bees, the single mom spends all her time foraging and nest building. There are no workers to defend a nest, and so they are unlikely to sting. I really enjoy seeing this wasp in the garden. It has these unusual yellow lines on it, and I think they're kind of docile. I can stand around and look at them. They don't come at you or fly near. They just want to be left alone. And they're part of a healthy landscape, so I am glad to see them. And since wasps are predators of other insects and they help with insect control, they are beneficial in a balanced landscape. Flower beetles also play a role in pollination, and the fossil record suggests they were among the first pollinators of Jurassic period flowering plants. So here a soldier beetle is foraging on Pearly Everlasting. This is a great garden flower, but it does make a thick network of roots, so it may not grow well with your delicate flowers or your roses, but give it its own spot where it can spread and crowd out weeds and crowd out your grass, and the pollinators will show up. If it's in the sunny spot, even in bright shade, pollinators find this flower. So this is the garden practices portion of the program. And part of the problem with garden chemicals is their overuse. In the United States, over 100 million acres of corn, wheat, soy, and cotton are treated with neonicotinoid pesticides annually. As more land is converted to large-scale agriculture, this number increases. And here we have a linden tree. Linden trees are ornamental, and so they're planted. They have flowers that are wonderfully attractive to bumblebees, but they also attract aphids, and aphids secrete a sticky substance. And this increases the chance that the trees will be sprayed to eliminate the aphids. In June 2013, 50 flowering linden trees were sprayed at a shopping center in Wilsonville, Oregon. The Xerces Society was called in to assess the damage. The parking lot was covered with bumblebees. They estimate over 100,000 bumblebees died. And they arranged to have netting placed on the trees, and it's told that the new bees were still coming in and trying to get to those flowers through the netting, even though they were poison. So in addition to agriculture, pesticide use on ornamentals further contributes to pollinator decline. And it's increasingly common for seeds to be pre-treated with these neonics. And that's why there's such a large acreage of treated crops, because the seeds are coming pre-treated. Well, the real problem with that is that neonics are systemic, and it's a pesticide that goes through the entire plant. So even though it's coating the seeds, when the seed sprouts, the flowers, the nectar, the pollen, the roots, the leaves, everything about the plant is toxic. So this is a reason that choosing organic can help protect our pollinators. Plants can also be pre-treated, and I let garden centers know I'm looking for pesticide-free plants that are safe for butterflies and bees. It's a great way to start up a conversation. It just builds some awareness. Sometimes people know about that, sometimes they don't, but it's a good conversation to have. And because of, I suppose, that conversation and the work by the Xerces Society and Pollinator Partnership and other groups getting the word out, we now have Be Safe labels for some plants. Some growers are taking this seriously, and they're producing these labels. I really appreciate those labels. Also raises awareness and shows that we can do more to protect our pollinators. And once again, this hollyhock is a reminder to choose those old-fashioned varieties and try to avoid the double flowers. And so we have on the right fireweed. The leaves, you can see my garden has an abundant showing of leafcutter bees. The long cuts line the sides of the bee's brood cell, and the round pieces cap the ends. They're very specific shapes. So if you see those shapes on some, like your roses, they like roses, this is a sign you have leafcutter bees. So maybe you can embrace that. I actually go out looking every summer and I get concerned. At the end of June, I don't often see them. By July, they're back. And so fireweed, they like serviceberry is another shrub you can plant that they'll go to. Birch leaf spirea as well. And I love the wings on this little leafcutter bee. Entomologists and people who study these bees will look at the pattern of the veins to identify the species. And so we have many species of leafcutter bees. And I find it curious that some people are being persuaded to purchase leafcutter bees for summer pollination. Unless you're an alfalfa grower, the bees being sold are alfalfa leafcutter bees, and they are not really, they are a specialist on alfalfa, but you probably don't need them in your garden. And your garden could very well already have plenty of native leafcutter bees. So the problem with purchasing bees is that we create competition by doing that with the bees that are already here. Competition for the flowers, competition for nest sites, and the potential to introduce parasites or pathogens. So there are about 4,000 species of native bees in North America, and 30% or so of them nest above ground. Nest sites can be found start on the upper left, logs, go across, twigs with hollow centers, drop down, stacks of wood, like a brush pile or a log pile. In the middle below is a undisturbed clump-forming grass, and stacks of stones or rock walls. So those are all common nest sites. Snags and stumps are also nest sites for insects and pollinators. And red elderberry, blue elderberry, also have stems that are pithy and they become hollow. And so growing these plants encourages our native solitary bees. They do use it. Elderberry, my elderberries they're a funny shrub. They're old wood, dies back, and there are little holes in it that are just ideal for solitary bees. If you're cleaning up stems in the garden that are hollow, berry canes can be hollow, any kind of hollow stems, gather them up and place them aside behind some shrubs, just in case they already have larvae inside. So if snags are in short supply, bumblebees may use a nest box, a birdhouse. This is my neighbor's. These are ventilation holes in the back of the birdhouse, and they called me over in a panic. So if you find that bumblebees have moved into a nest box, try to appreciate and enjoy having your own nesting bees and put up another house for the birds. The bees do like a nest box that's previously occupied. They build on the material already inside, and beware, they will sting. They're a social insect. They have workers, and if you are too close to their nest entrance and they don't like you nosing about, you could get stung. And bumblebees can sting more than once, so just know. And leaf litter, this is one of the easiest things we can do in our garden. The leaves break down, they enrich the soil, they act like a mulch, they retain moisture. and they suppress weeds. And not only that, they give queen bumblebees and some butterflies and moths will burrow into those leaves to overwinter. Their larvae may overwinter in the leaf litter as well. And that bumblebee emerged from this area. Those are snowdrop leaves. So she's probably a queen just trying to wake up. And I frequently see queen bees trying to wake up. And I think that's where the name Bumble comes from, because I had one come out trying to climb little violet stems. And every time it got close to the flower bent down to the ground and flipped the bee off. The poor thing got very frustrated. Well, I'm guessing it got frustrated. I was frustrated watching the bee try to get nectar, try to wake up. So I went over to tall Oregon grape, clipped some flowers, and put it where the bee could climb onto it. And I did that 2 or 3 times. And after a couple minutes, the bumblebee flew away. It had gotten some nectar and some energy, and it was stronger. So they are around and they are emerging. And if you see a bumblebee kind of hovering around a woodland or some brushy areas, it's probably looking for a nest site. To supply water, you can add a pan with gently sloping rocks or wood, but probably more important is mud, because the mud will be used by mason bees and the potter wasp, and it might even attract some butterflies. And that's just mud dug up from the garden. So they don't want anything fancy, just real dirt. And you can see it's pretty sloppy looking in winter, and it just sits like that year round. And later on, it's available to insects. So the bees in your backyard is a great introduction to the variety of bees that you may meet. And dropping straight down, I know I need a new picture of butterflies of Cascadia. So it's now butterflies of the Pacific Northwest. There it is. So I need to take a photo of that and replace this one. Butterfly gardening is by the North American Butterfly Association. Victory Gardens for Bees comes down from Canada, great book. And then on the right, we have books by the Xerces Society. So definitely check out their website if you haven't been there. Another aspect of gardening, planting for pollinators, is to offer a succession of nectar and pollen. And we don't have a lot of native plants in the winter that do that, although willows will appear in wetlands probably late February. They open up. That's some of our one of our first native plants, followed by osoberry or Indian plum. So in winter, February and March, I use ornamentals. Starting on the left, that's Christmas cheer rhododendron. And Bombus melanopygus loves that. And I guess I have a strong population because they are all over the Christmas cheer rhodie. In the middle, airy fairy is more like an azalea, but it's a rhododendron, and bumblebees and hummingbirds go to that. And then, of course, Andromeda or Pieris japonica at the top. Then by March and April below, we have tall Oregon grape, evergreen huckleberry, and twinberry, all great plants for both hummingbirds and bumblebees. Now, your turn to think if you recognize this. It is a native tree. So these are the flowers of big leaf maple. And along with our willows, the native maples are considered some of the most important plants for pollinators because of the timing. Mason bees and some bumblebees time their emergence to these flowers. And then our snowberry is a wonderful long season flower for bumblebees. It continues to flower even as the berries form late in the season. It's drought tolerant. It'll grow without much water. Actually, it's better to grow it without much water because it spreads. And so a dry hillside is ideal, and it will flower in sun or bright shade. So if you're able to create a small meadow for our pollinators, and you want to grow goldenrod or pearly everlasting or asters or even fireweed, these plants really spread. And so they do well, but give them their own space where they can compete with one another instead of your garden flowers, because people get frustrated when they overwhelm a garden bed, and they probably will, but boy, will they bring you some pollinators. So you'll have fun watching the pollinators. That's the benefit. Now, some more delicate flowers for pollinators that are native include any of the penstemons are excellent for pollinators. Seaside angelica isn't typically for sale, but it's a great plant. I grew it for a few years. They need gardens with good drainage. So these plants can be tricky to find, but if you can find them, they are rewarding. Goatspirit and ocean spray are both in the rose family, and their flowers are so similar, but the plants are quite different. And so in May, I check goatspirit daily for, here's a cedar hair streak. I also get echo azures and many kinds of bees. And ocean spray is just a darling. It's large, but it has, my ocean spray will have these little groupings of echo azures flitting about. So I'm thinking they have just emerged when I see that, and very rewarding in a garden. Checker mallow, we have different species. Any of them are good to grow. If you can find a checker mallow for sale, give it a try. Very attractive, sturdy, and good for pollinators. Delphinium gets eaten by slugs, but if you can find trolifolium, it's a little bit more resistant. Beautiful. And again, bumblebees and hummingbirds will find it. Of course, camas. Now, camas is a bulb, so that means it's going to flower late April or May, and then when it's done flowering, it dies back, and you won't see it until the following spring. So we have the two species, great camas on the left and common camas on the right with a honeybee. So Western columbine is, it's giving us an example here of the way native plants can appeal to varied species. The bumblebee doesn't fit in the narrow flowers, so it's robbing nectar by piercing the sides of the nectar tube. And in this case, the butterfly is doing a better job of pollination. And of course, hummingbirds are attracted to columbine. So I do have more on that section of converting lawn to habitat, but I'd like to break here and just answer any questions in the first part of the program. And then we can spill over to the second part. And so from the left of your screen, I'll just point out we have in the lower left a leafcutter bee, top center is a potter wasp, and then on the right a flower bee.
So we
Julia,
have a couple of comments. Bob, did you want to say something?
yeah, sorry to just barge in there. I just wanted to second your nomination of the twin berry. I had one. They're not really common in the woods around me, but I had one that popped up as a volunteer, and I have no other plant better for both the hummingbirds and the bumblebees. And one thing about the twinberry is that it has a long flowering period. It starts flowering fairly early, and it continues to produce a succession of flowers for well over a month or 6 weeks. And just it keeps making more, and more bumblebees and hummingbirds keep coming to them. And I had to move it recently because that volunteer had come in a very awkward place. And so I dug it up and had it transplanted recently, and I was just thrilled to see the other day that the leaves are coming out and it's still doing well, because I do look forward to that. Great, wonderful native plant for them. Butterflies don't give a hang about it, but the hummingbirds and the bumblebees certainly do.
Later, the songbirds come to the berries. So
Yes, yes.
that's later. But I agree, April, May, June, right into July for those flowers. So, and the pollinators keep coming. It's like they didn't get their fill. They just keep showing up and getting more. Yeah, it's true.
So we have a number of comments, and I'd like to just delay those until the end because Allison Center has a great comment, David Jennings, and also Tony Dickey. So I would like to get back to that, but it's 7 o'clock, and I just want to make sure that you get through the end of your presentation, Julie, before we get into some of these very specific topics.
Okay, thank you, Paulette. All right, I'll carry on then. So I just had to throw that photo in because earlier I showed the butterfly on it. But again, this is another shrub. I check it daily, usually May, to see who's coming, which pollinators have been attracted. So the native plants are the foundation of habitat, and they are beautiful, and the pollinators depend on them. The upper left is not quite native here. That's the ceanothus from California, Thrissiflorus. But boy, is it a bumblebee plant and in gardens. And I've also had California tortoiseshell larvae on my neighbor's ceanothus. So I used to wonder if it was used, and the California tortoiseshell did take residence, did use it for a host plant in my neighbor's garden. It was a young plant. Okay, so going across the top, that's sea thrift with a bumblebee, and on the right is the fireweed, and below that is hairy honeysuckle, and the yellow flowers are Oregon sunshine. So this is probably 10 minutes or so, not terribly long, this section. So I had the opportunity to create a pollinator garden at a middle school. This is the site. That's what it looked like in winter 2013. So pretty boring, pretty barren. The raised beds were built for a garden club, so that was a little bit helpful, as that there was a teacher connected to this, not quite a landscape. And here we can see that grounds maintenance workers were using herbicides around the raised beds. And we can use that fire hydrant as a reference. And behind it is a lovely green belt, lots of native plants, lots of brush piles, snags even, so plenty of habitat, places to overwinter. So we had good habitat nearby. Now I was working, even though I was working with the school and the garden club, a plan was requested, and this was the first plan, and the district did not want the big shrubs. So that required a second plan and allowed the project to move forward. It's really a very small garden. It's only 14 feet wide and 33 to 36 feet long, depending where I measure. But you know, that's a real benefit. It allows you to really keep it manageable and keep it looking good, as you'll see. So that first spring, this is May 2013. Oh, and there were 3 stages. So stage 1 or phase 1 was site preparation. We used large sheets of cardboard to cover the sod. That was covered with at least 6 inches of beauty bark because that's what the school had on hand and it was free. And the beauty bark did fine for weighing down and covering the cardboard so it wouldn't blow away. And it sat like that from the end of June all the way into autumn. So that's how we left it for the summer during summer break. And you can see this garden did receive the benefit. There's a hose. We're able to water. And so sometimes people ask, well, what do you do about that? Well, yeah, I took turns watering all summer with the teacher. So by autumn, we acquired wood chips and spread them, they were free, spread them where the paths would be. And this photo actually was January 2014 and represents the first planting of asters, goldenrod, and Oregon grape. And by spring, the garden club got busy. I took out the photo with the kids because that's the thing you're supposed to do now, not show students in photos. So anyway, they got busy planting lavender and evergreen huckleberry and a mixture of ornamentals and native plants. It's spring 2014. And later that summer, this is how the goldenrod looks and some asters. We can see the fire hydrant easily. And this is where ornamental grass was added to offer perhaps host plant for woodland skippers, potential nest site for bumblebees, though I haven't seen that take place. And in this lightly maintained area, clover came up. And since bumblebees will use clover also for several months, we let it stay there. And sometimes people want to pull it out. I'm like, no, the pollinators are using it. It's not hurting anything. So clover stays if you're creating a habitat site. The following summer, the plants were filling in nicely, and we added logs to outline the beds. And this helped keep students and dog walkers on the paths. So that summer, 2015, the garden club added flowers for pollinators, and the planting was complete. So that was stage 2. And beginning of stage 3, where was just maintenance, adding wood chips and weeding and watering and pruning and ongoing maintenance, stage 3. So here we are, spring of 2016, and the fire hydrant is no longer visible thanks to the big leaf lupin or large leaf lupin, Lupin polyphyllus. And so we have chives in the foreground, coral bells in the middle, and then the lupin. And you can see the clump forming grass is starting to take off. Lots of goldenrod in there too. And looking the other way, we have birch leaf spirea, lavender, more coral bells, and a planting of elegant clarkia in one of the beds. Now, elegant clarkia is an annual wildflower from California. It was planted from seed by the garden club, and it attracted bumblebees for the first 2 months of summer. And then the flowers died off after that, but it was so pretty. And people passing by were always asking what that plant was because just beautiful. And the goldenrod flowers in July and attracts all kinds of insects, including this, I believe it's a sweat bee. We know it's a bee by the scopae on its legs. And so it's not a wasp, and it's not alone. Nearby, a crab spider had taken on the yellow hue of the goldenrod. I think it's waiting for something smaller, maybe a honeybee. Anyway, it seems to be leaving the large bee alone. So bees and birds came to this garden right away, but the butterflies took a little longer. By August, woodland skippers came to the lavender. And looking west, we still don't see the fire hydrant. This is September. The goldenrod had finished blooming, and in its place we have yellow autumn helenium, asters, Joe pieweed, and fuchsia. And then in September, a West Coast lady spent several days coming to the flowers. This is New England aster. And as much as I love our native aster, Douglas aster did flower earlier, and it was all done. And the New England aster continued later in the season. And so it attracted this West Coast lady. And their caterpillars will also feed on nettles and mallows like checker mallow and hollyhock. And so I like to show that caterpillar so people know, hey, you need the food plants for the larvae. So goldenrod demonstrates the saying, plant and they will come. And we have here a bumblebee, at least one bumblebee, a honeybee, and another assortment. I can't point to them all, but we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 little pollinators all over this goldenrod. And this photo it was taken from the fire hydrant. So from the first planting on the left in January 2014 to a garden rich in nectar and pollen 2.5 years later. It's really been rewarding. And so I hope that encourages you to just get busy and plant. If you have lawn and you can reduce it, add some flowers. It's not only pretty, but it's great for the pollinators and really helps them out. So I did want to show this here at the end. I took a picture of Life Histories of Cascadia Butterflies. And Bob, I know I need to get the updated photo of your book with Caitlin, Butterflies of the Pacific Northwest. So it's full of tabs. It's pretty well used. And Life Histories of Cascadia Butterflies looks the same way. And then the Xerces Society books are great as well. And so there's our goat's beard. And I think it's Halictus rubicundus, but if somebody wants to weigh in, who knows out there and correct me or agree, that's all well and good. Anyway, all right, that's our program tonight. And if you have more questions and comments, I'm happy to hear them.
Well, wonderful, Julie. I have taken so many notes during your talk. I'll probably watch the recording as well. So thank you so much. This is a time where we can all just chime in and chat. There are a couple of comments that I wanted to specifically highlight. Tony Dickey, if you want to unmute and talk about the leafcutter bee, that would be great.
Yeah, I've got a great story on that. We had our Harvest Fest. I volunteer at Beacon Food Forest up in here in Seattle, and I was telling some visitors how leafcutter bees also like flower petals, and a leafcutter bee came along and demonstrated for us. Well, how I knew it is there was a patch of pollinator flowers, and it had a whole bunch of farewell to spring, Clarkia, and you could see the patterns, the round sort of patterns in the leaves, and that's got to be leafcutter. And so I kept coming back to it and not seeing the leafcutter bees actually do their thing, except for that day I was there. Hey, these leafcutter bees, they like these things, and the leafcutter bee came in and took a little thing, and it's just perfect timing. So I just want to share that.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, good story.
Okay, that's a lovely story. Allison, did you want to unmute and talk about that incident that Julie referred to?
Yeah. So after all those bumblebees died, the public was just so horrified that they called their state legislatures and lots of letters to the editor and things like that. So the Oregon legislature, I forget the name of the law, but they did pass a law about Oregon protecting bees and finding out more about bees. And so over at Oregon State University and then the Oregon Department of Agriculture, they started the Oregon Bee Project, which had the Oregon Bee Atlas to try to discover all the native bees in the state of Oregon. And they estimated 600 to 800 species. and I'm not sure of how it came up to Washington, but in the last few years, there's now a Washington Bee Atlas, and it's following the same kind of procedures.
Yeah, this is David Jennings on that last point. Um, we looked at the Oregon Atlas process, and our legislature is moving forward and said with a pollinator health task force. So at the last minute, we learned about it. We jumped in as a Washington Native Bee Society and said, we need an atlas just like Oregon or better. And so the legislature stepped up and did it. And in a lot of ways, we have a very progressive legislature on pollination issues, which is nice to be here.
Glad to hear that. That's good. Yep. Glad something came out of it, something productive.
Well, it also shows that if people, organize and say, we don't want this, fix this, it can happen. So that's fabulous. David, did you have any other comments you wanted to make?
No, I'm good. This was just such a great talk.
Yeah, it's
Thank you.
totally
Inspirational.
excellent.
Thank
Mark, you had a question. Why don't you unmute and give it? Mark Schuler? Okay, well, Mark is not responding. So he says he noticed quite a few beetles in your flower photos. Are any of them known for pollination?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Probably
There was
lots.
this. Yeah. Yeah. But they're a kind of an ancient pollinator. They're the ones that are from the Jurassic period. So 150 million years ago, the earliest pollinators of plants,
Yeah, I
flowering
saw
plants.
that. So they were the first. That was so amazing to me from the Jurassic. I love that detail.
And there are some families of beetles that, of course, that are more specialized for flowers, including the family known commonly as the flower beetles. And you commonly find beetles that are just covered with pollen. So I think there's probably quite a bit of incidental pollination that goes on, as well as some that are no doubt adapted for it and with the plants.
That could be a topic for another program. And I used to have more flower flies, but I'm trying to balance the length of the program with, how the content. So not quite as many. Yeah.
I've got a related question on the beetles. Are beetles are one of the most diverse insect families, from what I understand. Is that true, or
The most,
the most?
they are the most.
Oh,
Beetles
okay.
beetles are the ones that the great Harvard geneticist J.B.S. Haldane once said, was asked why there were so many beetles, and he said because God must have had an inordinate fondness for them. But they're the most diverse group of
And now we're looking at wasps actually supplanting them in diversity. That's
wasps have.
wasp.
There is.
Yeah,
So is. I had not heard that.
people hadn't looked at them yet, but between the various types, a lot of diversity there. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
it's amazing how much we actually don't know about insects. I mean, we think we're have all this knowledge, and the more that we learn, the more that we learn, we know we don't know. And I think Robert will back us up on that one.
That's for sure.
David, that sounds like a really interesting. I know you're about bees, but that sounds like a really interesting talk for your bee group because that's something I had never heard before either. So it sounds like it's fairly new. There's probably some publications about it that you could find somebody to talk about.
Yeah, I think they've been looking at it over the last 5 or 10 years and with eDNA and other approaches to looking at in the tropics how diverse they are. But I'm not the person to ask. We could probably look into it more.
Well, I think it'd be a great topic. I mean, I'd definitely come to that one. That sounds really fabulous. I also want to point out that Scott Ellerby is given a pitch for the Washington Bee Atlas. Do you want to comment on that, Scott, or do you want David Jennings to?
Yeah, I think David's the better person to promote the group, but my wife and I signed up about a year and a half ago, and we were trained as novice melitologists by Oregon State's Master of Melitology program. It's a wonderful program, and you get all the collecting gear sent to you. You get trained. There are field events where you can meet with other native bee enthusiasts, and we've just had a wonderful time. One of the better, nature experiences we've had, and I can't say enough about it. And we need lots more people to participate. I had really no prior exposure to native bees. I was always a butterfly guy, but boy, it really expands your horizon when you learn about our native bees. It's fascinating. So I would highly recommend it to everyone.
Well, and a reason I got associated with the Butterfly Association was you guys have such great field trips. So I was tracking the bees when you were tracking the butterflies. So, yeah, it's it's nice to learn more about nature.
Yeah, you were a president there for a while. So yeah, we loved it. We love having you on all our field trips. So you're always welcome. David James, if you're still online, I was wondering if you might talk about the story that Julie alluded to about the monarch tagging. Is that okay, Julie, to ask?
Absolutely, yeah. David, I'm not sure if you were here when I attempted to retell a short version of the Amelia's Monarch.
Yes, I did hear it.
Okay.
So yeah, you told the story pretty well, I think. It's just the end bit, I guess, where the butterfly was found 3 or 4 more times after that, all in Santa Cruz from memory, because there's like 3 or 4 overwintering sites in Santa Cruz, and that particular butterfly was found in all of the sites. So it was as well as being a great experience for the young girl that tagged the butterfly, it also helped us learn quite a bit about the fact that monarchs at the overwintering sites tend to move around quite a bit. So yeah, it really was a very valuable tagged monarch, that one. But yeah, you told the story well.
Just love that story. Thank you for letting me share it and sharing those photos so that
You're welcome.
it can be shared with more people. Yeah.
So
Now, Paulette, you had said that I didn't mean Paulette, I meant Julie. You said that you were surprised to receive a shipment of common milkweed instead of the speciosa, our native milkweed. And if you're using other ornamental plants in your garden, it doesn't matter.
I know.
It's not native in Western Washington anyway. So
True.
what difference does it make? But any one of them is absolutely superb for so many different kinds of pollinators. So I think, really, I shouldn't say this, I suppose, but the common milkweed, if you're going to grow milkweed in Western Washington versus our native Eastern Washington milkweed, what's the difference? I mean, some people actually manage to grow butterfly weed, the orange milkweed in Western Washington and Oregon. And my goodness, is that a wonderful nectar plant? You see so many classic photographs of especially coral hair streaks and other hair streaks, as well as Diana fritillaries. That's where I finally saw Diana fritillaries, was nectaring on the butterfly weed. It's a splendid one too. So all the milkweeds, none of them have anything to do with Western Washington,
I know.
but they're all
Thank you for a
wonderful.
point. Yeah.
But they're all wonderful nectar plants
Yeah.
in the garden.
It's
And while
true.
we're at it,
It's true.
and
Yeah.
while we're on favorite nectar plants, since your school garden especially used a lot of ornamentals that are not native, there's no hard and fast rule. Of course, we like to work with our natives. I've got many, many, many of the natives, but let's face it, many of the butterflies and other pollinators adapt very well to the non-natives. Some of them have done so in a way that has dramatically increased their numbers. But I just want to mention too, I'm having some work done right now on my garden by my fairy gardener I hire. And two of the plants I'm making sure she puts in, amongst many natives, are Mexican sunflower, and good old garden zinnias, because nothing uh, nothing attracts Vanessas, all four of them, more than zinnias do. And among the butterfly plants that Tia used to grow, I've never seen anything more attractive to a wider array of things than the great big red Mexican sunflowers.
I've
Yeah,
actually gone to the nursery here in Seattle to get Tithonia, the
Mhm.
Mexican sunflower for
Right.
my garden.
Tithonia, that's right.
A cool location, and those plants have not done well for me. I mean, I consider gardening an experiment and see, just see what happens. And so that's part of why I really strive to get the Washington native plants, is I want to see what happens and see what comes to what and see how well they do in a garden. And a lot of times that information isn't out there. And so I've enjoyed finding it out for myself. And I do grow different species of Asclepias and milkweed and the orange one too. And the Washington native speciosa doesn't grow half as well as Syriaca.
Right. Right.
So, and actually it makes sense because it grows in eastern Washington where it's sunny and drier and the soil is entirely different. And so my heavy soil, the Midwestern milkweed seems to not mind it. Still,
By the way,
I am just really someone who enjoys growing native plants, and I like to spread the word about it and share that information. And that's what a lot of people are looking for, because common garden books about all these other like zinnias, that's common knowledge, but people don't have as much information about which native plants will grow well where, and what is the benefit of specific native plants. So I try to fill in some of those little gaps.
and you
Well,
do it so
and
very,
one of
very
the
well.
real observations we're having recently is the fact is that non-natives are not edible by our local insects that eat plants. And so we're seeing a big decrease in overall insect diversity based on the fact that non-natives are taking over a lot of the landscape. They have developed different secondary compounds to prevent being eaten, and our local varieties of the species can't handle them. So non-natives thrive because our local insects can't eat them very well.
That's
And
not
part-
true you can't say that in an absolute basis, actually. Many of our natives feed a great deal on non-natives as larvae. I mean, the two-tailed tiger swallowtail is vastly more abundant throughout the West because of the spread of green ash, which is not native in the West at all. And there are many, many other examples. So sure, some of the species are limited to native plants, but as a hard and fast rule, that is often overstated and simply not the case. If our butterflies hadn't adapted as well as they have to certain non-natives, they'd be far, far more rare. So by all means, push the natives, but don't get rid of a particular patch of non-natives unless you know what's already using it. I've seen local populations eradicated through weed control projects. So it's not a hard and fast thing. It can go both
you
ways.
make a good point, and Susan Waters talks about this when she's talking about restoring the landscape for pollinators. You really need to look at what's present, and if during a certain part of time of the summer that only non-natives provide food, you don't pull the non-natives until you have a replacement on the landscape, which is
Exactly
sort of
that.
to your point.
Yeah, that's just right.
But there's a lot of other insects besides butterflies that eat those plants, and I think a lot of those may not have the same ability to adapt that the butterflies do.
Maybe.
The other part of that argument is that, yes, there are certain native plants that support a lot of different insects, but it's a pretty small subset, actually. A lot of different species of native plants don't get eaten by very many things. There's maybe, I think, like 10 or 11 species or genera that support the majority of the insects, is what I've been told by people doing the research that Doug Tallamy puts in his books.
So I've got a follow-up question. I am in Western Washington. In fact, I run the Pollinator Plus Guild at Beacon Food Forest. So I'm wondering, what are the basic recommendations for improving butterfly habitat in a public space? What flowers, what habitat should we include? Water features, those kind of things.
So I'm not sure if that's directed at Regina or at me or at anybody.
Why don't you go ahead and
Anybody?
give it a shot and then Regina can chime in.
Yeah, so I would just say, and again, and you guys know, I always say my observations are anecdotal, except when I'm part of a citizen science project and submitting it to, somebody who's collating the information. But my goodness, ocean spray and red osier dogwood and the elderberries, and it's not just the leaves, it's the flowers, it's the flower buds where the some of the butterfly eggs are being laid and then the larvae are feeding on those flowers. So those are just some that I have seen a lot of activity on.
And how about like basic habitat? I mean, how should there be mud? I mean, how should it be? What's an
Well, yeah,
ideal?
place mud is great, puddling, but even, animal scat, I put out cow manure a bunch of years ago, and that's where the butterflies were going. They were going to the cow manure because they were getting nutrients. So, yeah, observing from nature and seeing what's going on in nature, and then trying to provide some areas for that in our own landscapes, like places where we leave the leaves. We don't tidy up every square inch. We don't mulch every square inch, but leave some logs on the ground and brush piles and snags and just little pockets of nature and leaves on the ground so that they're not all tidied up.
I
That's the
would
easy one.
recommend getting that Xerxes book on butterfly gardening that Julie had in her little slide about the different books. It has all kinds of instructions on how to convert a garden to a butterfly garden because it's not just the food and it's not just the water features, but you need places for them to bask in the sun. You need places for them to spend the winter, which would be those leaf piles. Like I don't rake leaves in my yard. You have to have grassy areas that are not mowed. There's just all kinds, and you need to have shelter from the wind. There's just all kinds of different functions of the habitat that the butterflies are going to need. And that Xerxes book is excellent. It makes you want to go out there and plant everything.
It is.
Can you give us the title of that, Regina, again?
Well, the one I'm thinking of, Regina, there is a butterfly book, but I like Attracting Native Pollinators by the Xerces Society. To me, it's the most holistic. It covers everything. It includes plants, it includes the habitat parts that Regina was mentioning. So Attracting Native Pollinators.
Here it is. It's Gardening for Butterflies.
Well, both of those books, they're companions. I agree with Julie that the newer one, the Attracting Native Pollinators, has even more information. But the original butterfly gardening one, Attracting Butterflies,
Tony?
that's the gardening
Regina's
butterflies. That's very good
holding the
too.
book up if you want to have a look. Tony?
I'm so.
Regina's holding a copy of the book up if you want.
Oh, okay. I see.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I was covering. Oh, yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, I have the Attracting Native Pollinators. So I'll definitely get the one for butterflies. Because I mean, there is I'm a little bit more because I'm also part of the Washington Native Bee Society, so I know a little bit more about bees and habitat than butterflies. That's all.
Julie, I have a question for you about nursery stock and whether if a nursery carries natives, is there still a possibility that they were grown with neonics, or are they more focused on not using neonics? Are there any guidelines that can help us when we're buying from nurseries?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it would be unlikely that someone growing native plants would pre-treat with neonics. But if you see a label on a plant at a nursery that says pest free, that's a bad sign. That indicates it may have been treated. So we don't need pest-free plants. We want plants that leafcutter bees can use and pollinators can use. And yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate your focus on that because I think that one thing that people don't sometimes get, and I didn't till Regina and I did a kind of a deep dive into the neonics, was that it's not just a one-time thing. The whole plant is poisonous for its lifetime. It's poisonous. So that I think is just that was just a real revelation for me.
And it's hard to find them that haven't been pre-treated or to be sure about it. A lot of nursery employees just don't know.
They don't know, yeah.
Oh, my friend who's been acquiring some plants for me, she says often she'll go to a place and they don't know. Apparently, some of the companies have a policy with the new direction and things. Even let's see, what's the great big hardware combine? Not
Ace?
Lowe's
Home
or Home
Depot.
Depot?
Lowe's apparently is going to go neonic free, but not until 2024 or something like that. I don't know about Freddy's, but usually the employees do not know, and the labels often won't tell you. So it does take some sleuthing.
I will throw in that Fred Meyer is where I have seen banners that say, our plants are free of pesticides. And that's where I found those little labels
Oh,
that showed they were bee safe plants. So Fred Meyer is somewhat a leader from what I've seen. I've not seen that at Lowe's yet or Home Depot, but I don't go there very often either.
Oh.
So anyway, Fred Meyer has been a place where you could look for those bee safe labels on plants.
oh, good.
And if I'm not mistaken, our legislature passed a law last year that actually told people, the question was what to do with neonics, and the decision was they should not be offered to the general public at stores like Lowe's and Home Depot. And so in Washington, in the next year or so, they will be taken off the shelves. They will be available for commercial use, by trained applicators, but not by homeowners. So that was at least a step forward, as I understand it.
So Michael O'Glockman just put a note in. Do you want to unmute and comment on that? This is free discussion, so chime in.
Yeah, what David was saying is correct. In 2026, homeowners won't be able to use neonics. They'll have to have a pesticide license.
So you might still find them on your nursery plants, but really homeowners are the biggest users of per acre of various pesticides. They use much higher doses per acre than agriculture or commercial because all they have is their little quarter-acre lot and they don't have to make it pencil out financially. So they want it perfect and they just pour it on.
Well, that's great news. How did that come about? Was it just individuals, or was it societies, Xerces, or somebody who took it on as a project? Does anybody know?
Yeah, it was part of the Pollinator Health Task Force that I think David mentioned earlier. That group, along with Katie Buckley at the Department of Ag, kind of shepherded that through.
Wow, that's great. I'm just always so heartened when I hear that individuals can raise their voices and make a difference. So that's terrific. 2026, that's just next year.
And it makes me appreciate living in Washington.
Yes. Yes. So, Julie, I have another question, and anybody can chime in with questions now. I've been saving mine, but you all just chime in and ask away. I was curious about the role of mason bees in the orchard industry. I mean, Washington has a huge orchard industry. Are they being encouraged, or are orchardists seeking mason bees, or do you know anything about that?
I don't, but that's a great question. I don't, but we have other mason bees. Those are the blue orchard mason bees, Osmia lignaria, that are commercially raised and available to purchase. But we have other mason bees, other osmia that are, you might see throughout the summer. We see them in our garden at other times, and they're just here. So there are different kinds, just know that. But I don't know in answer to your question. That's a good question.
So the Scarab Society had a program on mason bees, and it was a guy from California talking about using them in orchards in California. And he didn't really know if they're being used up here, but maybe David James does. But apparently, yeah, that's a new thing in the California almond orchards, is they're starting to use the native mason bees.
David
Mason
James? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, mason bees are used quite a bit in the state of Washington, especially for the cherry crop. And commercially, there's both the Osmia lignaria and the non-native Osmia cornifrons that are being used.
So do you know how they're being used? Are they like on site? Are they being brought in, or do you know how that works? Or
There's large corporations just like apiaries for honeybees that they bring in just tens of thousands of mason bees and put them onto crops and then move them around. Not quite like honeybees because they're short-lived, or I should say a short life cycle. And then I think somebody else was mentioning there's other native osmia. I think right now we know of 62 osmia species in Washington.
wow, that's I had no idea. I mean, I know about the honeybees and the almond crops and everything. I didn't know that the mason bees also have a whole industry with moving them around for pollination. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
So, George Gehrig, did you want to comment?
Good evening. I'm not a member yet, but I've heard so much
okay.
about your association. Yeah, I was just listening to the comments. It struck me that maybe nurseries and landscapers are one of the few or only industries that seem to lack transparency on in terms of the things that they either put on or they get into their stock and then sell to the public. And just kind of following up on that, I don't suppose that you would ever know if they put anything on their plant unless there was a way for you to send it off and just kind of verify. Um, does anybody know of any testing site that does that kind of thing, or maybe how much it would cost to verify what someone has put on their plants?
Regina, do you know that?
Afraid I do not know.
Yeah, I don't either.
I would just say the general comment is that there's a lot that's way too secretive about our whole agricultural industry. I watched a video recently on how tomatoes are. I mean, basically, there's a monopoly on tomato plants as far as like the stuff that you see in the grocery stores. A kilo of those seeds is worth $200,000. And it's because the big ag, there's like 6 big ag companies around the world. And, that's all they want to grow, and they protect that very much. It's it goes beyond just what we're trying to do in pollinator industry. I mean, it's what we eat and how we eat it and all those different things that are leading into a lot of the habitat destruction and the fact that, we pretend because we have some scientific knowledge that we know a lot about stuff, and really we're just learning. We're just learning how to even eat. I mean, our diets aren't even ideal for us. You know what I mean? It's like we get this we get all this advertising and says this is healthy, and it's like we don't know. But
Paulette, can I come back unless there's more on that to another thing that Julie said about plants?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for those comments. I mean, this, Julie's presentation is just taking us all over the map. But please go ahead, Bob. Sure.
Tony didn't mean to take it away from there. I completely agree with everything you said, but be good to get back to plants for just a minute for Julie here to mention. I was very happy to see, Julie, that you showed that triptych of the 3 wonderful butterflies here that we have not too uncommonly that depend upon stinging nettles as their larval host. The satyr anglewing, the Milbert's tortoiseshell or fire rim,
Yes.
and of course the red admiral or red admiral.
Yeah.
And we're so glad to be able to have all of those when we do.
Yes.
And you mentioned that nettle can be a problem because it spreads quite a bit, but that's not always the case. In fact, in a lot of places, it's darn hard to grow nettle. And I believe a primary reason for that is that their nettle is very, very nitrogen dependent. So it's a rare plant in the Willapa Hills because the Willapas with their ridge and valley, ridge and furrow topography are heavily leached. There's a lot of hardpan, there's a lot of laterite, and nitrogen is very poor. And so we get very, very little nettle, except where the logging camps have been and animals have been stabled and communities have been, because it's where things have peed in the ground a lot. And that's where you get the nettles. I was out at Cape Lava once, and there was a really nice blush of red admirals happening. And I looked around and said, why? Well, it turned out that at this old campsite that had been a macaw site and later a logging camp, there were a lot of nettles and red admirals because of the nitrogen. So if people want to have nettle and they can't have nettle, if you can enrich the nitrogen, it will help a lot. Now, if you have a lot of nitrogen, as you must have, and nettles go too well, I don't know what to do about that, except cut them. But you're really shooting yourself in the foot to eliminate nettles from consideration, as the city of Portland did when they developed a butterfly garden along the Willamette River near McLaughlin Boulevard. And a number of us suggested that they have a nice big nettle bed. And they wouldn't do it because they were afraid of visitors getting stung by the nettles. Well, we said, okay, do this. Have a round bed of nettles and then completely surrounded with low nectar plants, preferably asters. And that way you'll have butterflies coming to the asters, feeding on the nettles for the next generation. And nobody can get to the nettles, but they wouldn't do it. They were afraid of nettles. And other parks, there was a lepidopterist who did surveys for years of the butterflies of one of the volcanic bluffs, the one near Rocky Butte, I think, near the airport. And he found that the city of Portland would routinely come by and send a person out to scythe down or weed eat all the nettles. And it completely obliterated the opportunity for great butterfly watching at that site. So thank you, Julie, for mentioning that. And I don't know if you have anything else to say about nettle, but I'm glad to hear a good word for it.
Yeah, I wondered, Tony was asking about, plants that are friendly for butterflies. And I wondered about nettle because it's also a food plant. I know that it's not really sold too much commercially, but I know people who forage it and cook with it.
Well, I dined with a group of young back to the landers in Skamakawa last week, and they made pureed nettle for the starter course. It was absolutely delicious.
Yeah, it's like spinach, but a little earthier, more complex
Exactly.
flavor. Yeah, it's really, really lovely. You have to handle it with gloves when it's raw, but as soon as it's cooked, it's fine. So it's a little tricksy My local grocery store was bringing it in, but people didn't know what to do with it, and they were afraid because of the stinging, and so they're not carrying it anymore. So I think in certainly in this area, in the Seattle, urban Seattle area, foraging is the best bet. Although I have to say that one of my chef friends has been cited for foraging at Discovery Park. So, so I don't, you have to be careful where you forage, I guess is my point.
You can get seed for nettle. I mean, nurseries don't want to grow it, but I know a native seed supplier in Port Townsend who does include nettle in his offerings. That's the Inside Passage Seed Company in Port Townsend. And I have bought nettle seed from him, and I put it in all of my restoration areas where I think it might grow well.
Good for you.
Yeah, and I actually freaked out an inmate crew once because I was waiting at a gate for the van full of inmates to come do some Scotch broom work. And while I was waiting, I had brought my leather gloves and my plastic Ziploc bag, and I was harvesting nettle while I was waiting for them at the gate. And they pulled up and they said, "What are you doing? What are you going to do with that?" They couldn't believe I was going to eat that.
Well, it's cool that they knew what it was.
Some of them did. You get an interesting mix on these 10-person crews. You get some city boys and you get some country boys.
I bet.
So
I
Scott,
did have to tell them that they were afraid. There was one crew that was afraid of bears and mountain lions. And I said, no, the scariest thing out here is stinging nettle.
Scott, did you want to weigh in with your knowledge about the testing?
Yeah, I'm not an expert, but I recently had a need to do some soil testing and had to cast about a bit for labs that were capable of doing kind of a full gamut soil test. And in that process, I learned that there are some real capable specialty labs on the east side that serve, the agricultural business community, and they advertise the ability to detect, various chemical compounds in plant, soil, compost samples. So there are labs out there that can do that. So if there's something you're concerned about in particular, they can test for it. So I think your local county extension agent would probably be the best resource to pursue that line of inquiry.
Yeah, that's a good point. Our county extension agents are a wealth of information. So yeah, and we can use them. Most of them on the east side because of the commercial crops that are grown over there. But yeah, they're a great resource. Okay, any other comments, questions, thoughts? Oh, I did want to call out, Scott, you posted in the chat about the PDF on managing the Blue Orchard mason bees. And so I just wanted to direct people to that, to either make a note of that, or I was able to click on it and open it in my browser. So if people want to follow up on that, you can probably Google it as well. Is that for kind of building home houses, nests for the bees, Scott?
Yeah, I learned of it through that same Scarab online presentation here a week or two ago that I think Regina or somebody mentioned, and it's helpful for a homeowner who's interested in pollinating their fruit trees or other plants. So, but I guess it's equally beneficial to both homeowners and people involved in agriculture. So it was a fun read, and it's not very long, and it's approachable. It's not overly scientific. So I found it very valuable.
Julie, do you have mason bee houses, or do they just live in your area, or?
They just live in the area, but I think originally they came from someone purchasing them, and then they ended up at my place because just like the honeybees, there's habitat, there's food, there's mud, and pretty soon they're living here, and they made nests between. We have a shed with a double door, and one door stays permanently closed because we pile things up behind it. And one year I opened it up and it was filled with mason bee larvae between the frame and the door frame, because it was close to the mud, it was close to plenty of nectar for them. And so they had built their little brood cells right into that space in the doorway. So they're around, they're just here, but I haven't added them. So, but I do think they could have come from neighbors. I do have one little FYI that I'll mention before we close out the evening. So April is Native Plant Appreciation Month. And if you check the Washington Native Plant Society website, WNPS.org, you will find that there are many special speakers. This month, there's usually a theme, and this month the theme is community science, exploring biodiversity. And so there are speakers about iNaturalist and how to get involved in a BioBlitz. There's a BioBlitz, starts on April 20th, ends by the end of the month, I think. So anyway, if that interests you, check out the WNPS.org and see what's going on for Native Plant Appreciation Month. It's just pretty interesting, and I like the section on chapters. You can check out chapters all over the state and see what kind of native plants are in that area, or the activities that field trips and speakers that are happening elsewhere, both locally and regionally. So anyway, you might enjoy some of the information coming out there. And the BioBlitz, while we hope it's going to be about plants and bud burst and things like that, phenology. It can be anything. It could be butterflies. You can do your own, contribute your own information through iNaturalist and participate. So the public is invited to check that out.
Okay, well, thank you very much. As I say, you've really sparked a lot of wide-ranging conversations. So thank you for such a
That's good.
wonderful
Okay.
presentation, Julie. I have a whole page of notes. So,
good,
thank
good.
you very, very much. Yeah,
Well,
very great presentation.
Good to
So,
see everyone again. Thank you.
thank you, Julie. I just wanted to add one thing. Next month, we're going to have a talk by Stu Weiss, who will be talking about the rehabilitation of the habitat in, Bob, you're going to have to remind me. I always Presidio, in the Presidio area of San Francisco. Starts with a P. And the reintroduction of a butterfly to try to facilitate you can't reintroduce an extinct butterfly, but try to create the habitat that may enable the Xerces blue to reemerge. So I think that'll be a very interesting talk as well. So that'll be the first week of May. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Thank you again, Julie, so much. It was really a lovely, lovely talk, and we'll look forward to seeing you all next month.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
What?
Just so we're.
Oh.